Rev up your engines!
Now, here's something that's kind of frightening. 2021 F-150 owners are already facing rusting and corrosion on their vehicles. These are the 2021. Guy in Spring, Texas shows how it's all this rust. They just say, oh, it's just surface rust. But I mean, the nuts and bolts are covered with rust. As the saying goes often, they don't make them like they used to. Well, in this case, they're making them like they used to, because if you know anything about Fords decades ago, they were notorious for being rust buckets, that they would rust away. When we were a kid, we had a Ford Fairlane. You could see the road in the back seat because the panels on the bottom all rotted out. It still ran because they had a frame, but the body was just rusting off of it. So in this case, they're making them like they used to. They're rusting out. Of course, Ford is saying, nah, that's just superficial. But really, if you look at some of these pictures, there's no way you should have a 2021 truck and it looks that rusty already. Obviously, the nuts and bolts, they're corroded. They should have been coated better with something. They're just obviously using bare steel ones with no coating whatsoever, which is stupid. If they're this rusted already in a place like Texas, imagine what they're going to look like up north after a few years. And of course, Ford is saying, oh, that's just normal superficial rust. Well, guess what? They didn't used to look like that when they were a few months old. And if they are today, they're doing something wrong. They're probably saving a nickel by not coating the nuts and bolts with any kind of corrosion or painting parts that, oh, well, just leave them alone. Who cares if they look rusty? It just amazes me, you know? And then they cover their hindies. Oh, you know, oh, that doesn't mean anything. That's normal. No, it isn't normal. Years ago, people bring me new ones that are all clean underneath. They didn't look all rusty like that when they were just a few months old. The more things change, the more they stay the same, and the more the corporations just give you a BS line of why it's that way and that there's nothing wrong with it. Well, don't say I didn't tell you so, but I did. It turns out that this dirt cheap electric vehicle in China is outselling the Tesla Model 3 in China. This car is exactly what I said about electric cars. You can make them tiny and you can make them cheap. They're just batteries and electric motors after all. It's the Wuling Hongguang Mini, and this electric car starts at below $5,000. Yes, I'm not making this up. It has room for 4 people. It's got back seats in it. It's not just like a tiny little smart car. You can fit 4 people in it. Now the top speed is 62 miles an hour. And if you get the big battery, it's got 106 miles of range. Like I said, they should start with small electric cars, not big electric cars, if you're using batteries, because of the range and the size. And the people that are into being electrified, most of them are living in a big city. They're going to little parking spaces. They're not going all that distance. That's fine. And then on the other hand, like I've been saying for years, the hydrogen fuel cells, those are great for the big old semi trucks, because you don't want big heavy batteries pulled by a big heavy truck. They got a limited range. Hydrogen fuel cells make more sense then. Why not start with hydrogen fuel cells of the big giant trucks and a battery car to the little ones, kind of work to the middle and see how it pans out in the long run. But as you can imagine, the Chinese, hey, if they can make a car for less than $5,000, they're going to sell an awful lot of them, especially the inner city people that are going small distances. P. Johnson says, I bought a 13 Silverado with 90,000 miles on it 6 months ago, sold it today, nice truck. Now I'm looking at a 2000 F-250 with a 7.3 automatic. Her husband fixed up and died. It has 517,000 miles on it. Looks nice. But I don't know. Should I buy it? It's listed for $7,000. It'll probably go for $5,500. Is it worth it? Let's look at your situation. You said you had a 13 Silverado with 90,000 miles. You bought it 6 months and sold it. So you don't keep your vehicles that long. If you check that F-250 2000 out, or if you're not a mechanic, have a mechanic check out and he says it's okay, odds are it's going to last you at least 6 months. You seem to be a guy who flips your trucks an awful lot. Now, the thing is, if you're looking at a truck with 517,000 miles, it's only worth whatever anybody is going to pay for the thing. It doesn't matter what kind of receipts they have. You're getting no guarantee. It's a 21-year-old truck with 517,000 miles on it. If it really looks nice and it's all shiny and a mechanic says it's okay, go ahead. You don't seem to keep your vehicles that long anyway. In the long run, it might not be that smart of a thing. Buying a vehicle that's got 517,000 miles. There's so many things that could go wrong with it. The woman's husband, who's dead now, fixed it all up, but who knows how far he actually went, what kind of work was actually done. That's an awful lot of mileage. Ryan, Minnesota says, I live in a salt belt. My 2010 GMC Yukon is a classic rust starting in the cab corners. I tried to patch it, sand it off, use Bondo, painted, matched it, but the rust is back. Without paying a ton of money, how can I neutralize it from growing? I don't need it to look perfect. I want to stop it from getting worse. Here's what you have to understand about rust. Once you see that rust, that's it for that particular part of metal. If you want to stop it, you have to cut that metal off, weld new metal on, and then paint it. Now, if you don't want to go that far, you can go get wire brushes, and if you have an air grinder like mine, you'd use that, or if you don't, an electric drill. Get rid of all the rust you can possibly rub off. Then you coat it with that rust inhibitor that turns the rust to primer, and do that a couple of times. Then put a little Bondo and paint, and it will last a little bit longer, but you do have to get the real rotten parts off, because if you hit parts and they crunch, you're going to have to get rid of all that stuff. Then maybe put fiberglass backing on it after you put the rust inhibitor paint on and let it dry. That supposedly turns most of the rust into primer. Then in the holes, put some fiberglass and Bondo and then paint it. But you got to get rid of most of the crinkly parts, because if you don't, it'll just keep rusting away. Just like anything that starts breaking off. If you're working on your house and there's a piece of rotten wood, you got to cut the rotten part off. You can't put Bondo over it. Well, actually, I did in Houston, my old house. I didn't use Bondo. I used polyurethane sealer. And some of those windows, man, 20 years later, they were still holding up. I just get a level and I'd smooth it off. And when it dried, hey, 20 years, that stuff still said it didn't rot anymore. And then the bulldozer came down a few months ago and knocked the whole house down when they're building the townhome. So short periods of time, there's lots of stuff you can do, but that's wood. And metal, once it rusts, isn't going to stop. You got to get rid of the rusty parts and then coat it with those coatings that they sell that say turn rust into paintable primer. But the thing about that is not flaking rust. You got to get all the flake off with brushes and stuff. Joshua, Mechanic Noob, says, Scotty, what do you think about rubberized undercoating like the Bosnia rubberized undercoat spray can? I'm going to do it on our old 97. I watched the video about rust, but how about the ones that are in cans? Yeah, they work. The only problem is you can't really spray over rust. If it's rusted and you spray over rust, it's just going to fall off. If it's not rusted, first you got to clean all the crud off. So go to a good steam cleaner place and steam clean all the stuff off and let it dry for a day. Then spray that on. It does work, and you might think, why is it rubberized? Well, that quiets noise down too. That's why it's rubberized. It makes it quieter in a vehicle. It won't make quite as much noise. But they got to have a good surface. Like everything else, preparation is half the deal. It's like painting a house. Any moron can come with a paintbrush and paint a house. The real hassle is preparing the wood to accept the paint, not having it flake off. The scraping, the caulking the holes, the preparing it all, getting the mold off. Then painting is actually the easy part. It's the preparation that is the hard part, and the part that's going to make it last and not just flake off in a year or two. Same thing with the rubberized undercoating. You got to get it prepared before you put it on. I have high NOx. My smog failed twice. 99 Acura Integra. I tuned it up, all that stuff. I tried cat clean. It actually went up, so I followed Scotty's advice by putting a gallon of lacquer thinner. Now it passed the smog at 25, but failed at 15. What should I do? I would say drive it a little and try another gallon of lacquer thinner with half a tank of gas and see if that'll clean it, because it's obviously working. Now if it doesn't work, odds are you're gonna have to buy a new catalytic converter. It is a 99. It's an old cat, but at least being a 99, the universal cats will often fit on them and work perfectly fine to make it pass. So but try the cleaner again. It made it pass at 25. Maybe it can make it pass at 15, but since it did better at 25 than 15, check for vacuum leaks. You may have a vacuum leak. If you have a vacuum leak, it'll make it run leaner and put out a lot of NOx at lower speeds but not higher. So check really closely for vacuum leaks. You could have a vacuum leak. Watch my video, Finding Engine Vacuum Leaks with a Cigar. You don't have to use a cigar, anything that creates smoke in the system to see where it's leaking. You could easily have a vacuum leak, because they will make it run leaner and higher NOx at lower speeds but not higher speeds. Because when your engine's spinning fast, that little vacuum leak doesn't affect that much, but when it's going at lower speeds, it affects it more because there's less air going in the engine, and if you have too much extra from a little leak, that'll make the fuel mixture change a lot more than when the engine's going fast and it's sucking a lot more air in and spinning at higher speeds. Zach North says, I'm looking at an '08 Lexus IS250, 180,000 miles, private salvage title for $4,700. I got one question. Do you feel lucky? You buy a salvage car, you're rolling those dice, baby. You're going to get snake eyes, 7. What are you going to roll? You don't know. 180,000 miles. Those things last a long time, right? Now, if they hadn't have a salvage title, I'd say with that kind of mileage and it's 13 years old, I'd offer them 4 or something like that. With a salvage title, it is a total gamble because you don't know why it was salvaged. Maybe it was flooded. And then years later, all the electronics go bad. You never know. That's a real riverboat gamble there. If you're a riverboat gambler, you want to gamble on it, you never know what the problem was with the salvage title law. I personally would stay far away from that vehicle. Mario89 says, over the last 5 months, my Kia Optima, every time I start to reverse or accelerate slowly, the front passenger side starts to jerk, like someone was rattling it. It doesn't do it every day, but it has to be cold. It doesn't do it when it's warm. Any suggestions? Let's pray it's something like your brake is sticking on that side. If the brake caliper's sticking when you back up, then it'll jerk because it's sticking, it's trying to break itself loose. Do look at the CV axle. Maybe one of the boots got ripped, the rubber boots, and the grease will leak out, then it won't operate smoothly. And pray, because it is a Kia and their transmissions aren't that great, that it's not the transmission starting to go out, because that could make one side of the transaxle jerk, and that's because the inside of the transmission isn't given the right amount to that side, and it could be that the internal differential on the automatic transmission is starting to go out. And I'll pray it's your brakes. Jack it up one morning and put it in neutral and see if the one side is binding and the other isn't, and it could be a sticking brake caliper. Pray it's that simple and not the transaxle going out. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.